And aloha. I don't know if you saw my bio, but I actually live in Hawaii now after having been in Denver for 25 years. And I have a consulting practice for CSR and social impact called Fourth Wave Strategies. I don't want to go back too far because I'm old, but I'll summarize by saying I spent the first half of my career in the nonprofit sector in development and marketing. I got my master's in nonprofit management from Regis. And then I made the shift to corporate philanthropy and CSR for the next 10 years. And then I've been consulting now for about a year and a half. On the nonprofit side, I was primarily in development and marketing and senior leadership with Mile High Youth Corps. And then my CSR career started at Excel Energy, working in their foundation and managing corporate giving for Colorado, which included all the various things that go with that, from United Way campaign to grant making to supporting volunteerism and sponsorships and internal and external communications. And then I went to QEP Resources, which is an energy company headquartered in Denver, a lot smaller than Excel, but worked in 7 states across kind of the Midwest and the South, and created and led the CSR program for about 6 years. As the oil prices boomed and busted, I got to grow and expand and then shrink and divest through that program before deciding to move to Maui and launching my consulting practice, which focuses on both nonprofits and companies, as well as foundations, and doing a variety of work around strategy, partnerships, various different things of social impact that you can see on the website. So I'll stop there and let Caity go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caity. I started my career out actually on the other side. So I started with corporate social responsibility, working in the financial services industry with Capital One. I remember being very sad about it because I wanted to go into nonprofit. I just couldn't find a job in nonprofit. And so it was almost a little bit of a different experience. But I started kind of working more on employee engagement and volunteerism with Capital One, and grew that as the company's CSR program grew into some of our sustainability and larger grant making efforts, especially in some acquisitions, which is always a really fun topic if anybody's companies are going through that right now. Then after Capital One, I switched into the nonprofit sector, also working with United Way in New York City. Did a lot of grant making. I think it was a really cool experience to get to be on the nonprofit side and understand a little bit of the internal pain points that sometimes nonprofit partners don't want to share, and just kind of understanding those a little bit more, especially helpful when I went back over to the corporate side. I did a little stint with a international nonprofit startup, which is always really fun. It was kind of going through a nonprofit without having any branding, and trying to raise money for the efforts that they were doing mostly overseas. And then switched over and joined Dish a few years ago to help start up their CSR program, and spent a few years there. And recently, just last November, moved into the tech industry, supporting and leading a diversity and inclusion and CSR and sustainability program for a tech company called Nutanix that's based out of the Bay Area. So that is kind of my overall background. I think I covered everything that we were supposed to, but feel free to ask questions.
Erica, do you want to come off mute and ask your question, or do you want me to read it for you?
After I just got done writing the whole thing, yeah. Yes, I would love to ask this. Those of us that are in the CSR or ESG field probably field a lot of questions for people who want jobs like yours, want to kind of quit the nonprofit gig and get into corporate CSR. And I find myself somewhat unhelpful, I think, when I meet. I absolutely say yes, always meet with those folks, but have very limited advice to give them, because I feel just very lucky that we get to be in these types of positions. And I tell them to go do the CSR certification class and, Pete's class and things like that. But other than that, I'd love to hear what kind of advice the two of you would give to people that are seeking roles like you had and have in corporate CSR.
Yeah, I think that I always kind of struggle with that question the same as, that's why I was smiling while you were asking that question, because I obviously fell into it trying to get into nonprofit and ended up in CSR. But I think one of the things I always tell people, kind of similar to what we've done sometimes with like veteran hiring programs, finding things in your resume and like skills that you have that are transferable. And like I always offer to help people think through those. Like right now I'm hiring a data analyst person on our team, mainly because I hate Tableau. And if I spend one more day in there, I'm going to scream or cry or both. But I don't necessarily need someone who has CSR experience. I just need someone who has the data analyst experience for that. And so looking for those roles where you might join a team that you're doing something that's transferable, but the role, like they'll have exposure to all of the things we work on with community investments and diversity and inclusion and sustainability. So they can then take those skills and move into a CSR role later. And also being willing to take a step back if they're further along in their career and just want to make that switch, obviously, is part of that too.
I would add to that, thinking about, depending on what your background is, coming in the nonprofit sector, if you don't have any business background, figure out how to get more business acumen. I think when I first got hired at Excel, one of the things my boss told me after I had been there a while is that I was the only candidate from a nonprofit organization that actually had a business degree. And that totally jumped out to her superiors. And I think people often underestimate how much work we do internally versus externally, and how much goes into the budgeting and finance and financial modeling, and being able to understand the financial situation of the company and how what you're doing supports it. And if you can't speak that language, you don't really get the buy-in from executives because they don't see that you're a business person. Does that make sense? So that would be one thing. I think the other is that just staying up to date on what's happening. Like this has become a profession. It's not like corporate charity anymore. Like it's a career field. And as Caity mentioned, there's certifications and other things, but there's also so many other ways to stay up to date on what's happening in the field, you know, whether it's the various newsletters and free resources from associations, but, you know, just becoming a student on your own of understanding what's happening. And I think the third piece would be really get involved in the community beyond your own nonprofit that you work for or the single issue you're involved in, like showing that you are out there understanding the issues in the community and how they intersect and how businesses play a part, and going to things where business people are. So whether that's chamber or events, and not be civic events, of course, but just being where people in the corporate sector are will help you understand how we look at community engagement and social impact from the quote the other side. And the more you can speak that language, it'll help people in companies who don't understand what it's like to work at a nonprofit get what value you would bring on that. So that's the piece of it.
Yeah. And I think to piggyback off that a little bit too, I love that example of just like finding ways to have a business background too. And I think if you can find someone within the CSR world that's in business that can help you look over your resume, like if you're in fundraising and development with nonprofit, you can transfer that into sales, which then can also kind of transfer into building a business case and selling that and socializing things internally within the company. So finding those right talking points to say during an interview that you're applying for CSR to show that you can kind of transfer some of the things that you're bringing from the nonprofit world into the business world is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That was fantastic advice. I know I definitely am taking notes because I get asked that question as well, and usually I'm sending the people to all of you. If other people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And while you're thinking about your questions, I'll add one to it, kind of following up on it. Can you talk a little bit more about your role itself? What does a typical day or week look like for each of you? And I know we've got two very different jobs here, so I'm excited to hear what you say.
I'll go first. I'll talk about what my job was like as an in-house person, and then I can give you like two things about consulting. But I think when I first shifted over to being in-house, there were like three things that jumped out as like the big surprises in the first 2 weeks. And one of them was just the volume of inquiries that came in, especially when I was at Excel. Like I truly believed that people got their bill in the mail, back when people got mailed bills, and saw it. And it's like, oh, yes, Excel wants my money. I should ask them for money for my charity. And I mean, I got so many, it was just so random. But just, I didn't ever really think about the volume that comes in, especially for companies that work in multiple states, but everything gets sent to one centralized person. So that's just, I think it's an interesting thing. And they come from all directions from, a lot of it comes from internal employees, which is a whole different piece, which I think would lead to the second thing is there's a lot of time spent on those kind of general inquiries, but also so much of the work is internal. Like I said before, I had always thought that really people in this role were not involved in the company. They were always out in the community, like representing the company and doing those things. But at both companies, a huge amount of the time is spent internally, not just on the administrative pieces, but to Katie's point, building the business case, generating that support, not from just from executives, but employees throughout the company are such a huge component of CSR. And so much work is done just inside the company, which seems counterintuitive, but that's just a big piece of it. And so I think the balance of a typical week was there was no typical week. It could be, if it was budget season, you never got to go out and be in the community, and it was very annoying. But you might have days where you're involved in lots of internal meetings and then out in communities, and then you're going to chamber events, and there's no typical day, in my opinion, either at Excel or at QEP. And I traveled a ton for QEP because I covered the 7 states. So that was just a whole different level of what that looked like. But I think the biggest thing is the balance between the internal and the external, and how to kind of meet the needs of both.
Yeah, that's great. I absolutely agree. I'm kind of racking my brain. I don't feel like any day looks the same. That would be really great if it did. But I think one of the things that I'm learning right now in my role is kind of how to strategically guide my time, so that, because you do have a lot of focus on, you want to pay attention to your community partners. You want to also be able to pay attention internally to what you're socializing, who you're getting ideas in front of. And I think that piece of it, to Shanda's point, is something that's really overlooked, of how, you know, we don't get to just pick like, I really like education, so now we're going to work with City Year for a while. Like, you have a lot of layers of people that you have to justify how that fits with the brand, how that fits with the focus, how you're going to message that. And so I think that actually takes up a lot of background time. And so you don't get to spend as much time with nonprofits and with community partners as you want to. But I think one thing that's new in my role now is I haven't had diversity and inclusion inside of it. And I know that's kind of a trend for a lot of CSR programs right now, to start including that. And a lot of that right now, to my point earlier, is data collection for the company. So I've been spending a lot more time than I ever have in the past on data collection to measure internal, like, pay equity gaps, engagement scores based on gender and diversity, so that we can measure those and figure out what's going on internally with the company. Sustainability is a really big one right now for us, because we have never released, the company I'm with now has never released an annual corporate citizenship report. And so we're doing baseline data metrics for all of our sustainability. And I would say that's actually something I think D&I and sustainability are the two things that I get the most questions of, both from our sales team for RFPs that our clients are doing, and also from our investors. So those two things actually will play into scores that certain organizations will give to a company that will impact what investors will pay attention to us or not. And so what's really interesting is how, I think, over the last decade, I've seen how in the beginning it was kind of a feel good. Obviously, I worked in financial services, and so we had government compliance around what we gave and where we gave it to, and what products we donated to lower income areas. And that's really evolved. And that was more just in the financial services industry, and everyone else did kind of a nice to have because it was really helpful for branding. What's interesting how it's turned into, this is a need to have, this is a top priority for our C-suite, not just because it's, oh, we want to be a good brand, we want to attract good employees, but because our investors are reaching out and saying, hey, we haven't seen you release anything externally, like, we're going to start reevaluate funding, or we just want to see these numbers, or we want to get to a score of 180 or whatever it is with ISS, so that we can open up opportunities for other investors to invest in us, who are saying they're not even going to look at us until we get to a certain score on this. So a lot of my calls right now are with investors and just telling them that we are working on things and we are going to release it, and getting our first report out with a lot of data. So.
Yeah, that is fantastic to hear. So kind of related to your topic, Katie, I see Deidre put in the chat is what are some of the ways that you build the business case that you're exactly talking about? So I know investors is one way, but do you have other advice either of you would share? And Deidre, if you want to add anything else to it, feel free to come off mute and do so.
Yeah, I think my goal originally is always going around, find your top business units that you want to meet with and kind of do a listening tour. And this is for if you're on the CSR side, do a listening tour. So it's not really marketing's job to fit CSR into marketing. It's my job to figure out how CSR will support marketing's goals and be able to open communicate with those. And so I always do like a marketing, a legal, an IT and product. I am not a tech person. I could not tell you the details of even the company I work with right now, and I'm working on it with a lot of conversations and learning with our product team. I don't know what data clouds look like or how to talk about them, but knowing that product then helps me talk to nonprofits of like one of our nonprofit clients is UNOS, and the way that our data cloud works, it helps support them be able to flip things faster and store data and protect their information. And I couldn't tell you the details of how, but that's what I'm trying to learn so that when I'm in meetings with other nonprofits, that's not something they're thinking of, but that's something I can be thinking of. So we're integrating our product into our support for communities as well. And I think as you talk about making the business case, kind of keeping all of those things in mind, like I always look at the CSR person, you have dotted line reports to everyone. And so you're kind of pulling in all this information and centralizing it and then coming up with the story of this is how this program is going to support our brand. So I'm in the tech industry. So women in tech is a huge focus for us because one, that's the right thing to do. Two, it helps us if we're investing in youth and women in tech, that helps us create a hiring pool that we can then tap into so that we can create top talent programs and improve our own employee diversity. And then three, it actually does help, like we can find and invest in really good projects that may actually help support our product development as we're looking at different nonprofits that are working in kind of similar things. So kind of all of those things. And I will say one of the lessons that I've learned definitely the hard way and continue to learn, I wish that I would just learn it once. When you have big presentations and you have a few executives or you have a few people in the business present, socializing it first with one or two, like find your one or two that are a little bit of buddies or a little more approachable, ask them if you can run a few ideas by them. Then you have one person in the room that's already kind of signed off on things. And sometimes it's helpful to know like who's the natural leader within a group. And that really helps when you're socializing a business case. I would say on the nonprofit side, when you're kind of pitching and trying to pitch a grant, just researching, like it's so helpful when nonprofits understand like, oh, I saw you guys do this program. I think we have this that might really fit into it. So they're kind of, they know a little bit about your company and what you've invested in the past if that information's available. And that's really helpful.
I would add, I think Katie's piece about, meeting with different departments and understanding how you can support their goals is really key because they don't always put it together. Like there's very few departments that don't like CSR, like they think it's great, but they don't see how it relates to them. And I think that piece of looking at what you're doing with the CSR initiatives, and in particular, the community engagement side and philanthropy, how it aligns with business goals, and being able to articulate that internally and externally is really important, which I think then goes to the piece on the nonprofit side. If you can show the alignment when you come in the door and show that you've done the homework and you understand like why our company is doing what we do in the community, and then can put it into our language of, well, this is how our program aligns with the work you're trying to do around employee engagement and, increase your presence in this new market. Like that's so impressive because the reality is that so many nonprofits don't do that deep dive into understand the company's motivations and why they're doing their work. So those that do and show us the alignment makes our job easier to then explain that alignment internally and to get the funding. I think that's the biggest thing is it's easier to make a business case if your whole strategy is aligned with the business. that's why it's really hard, like Katie said, to just, I'm passionate about a certain issue and try to get that into my company, I don't own, is rarely going to happen unless, fortunately, I went to work for companies where I was passionate about the issues we were supporting. But if it's not aligned, you don't get the support. In a way, we are like internal fundraisers to our executive leadership to get the budget and the sort of the ability and the support, but not the authority to engage employees and kind of mobilize a company in a direction. So I always say to nonprofits, the alignment is the #1 most important thing in seeking out partners. So if you can align what you're doing with our goals and motivation and what we're trying, how we're trying to have impact, that's the most successful.
That is such great advice. And I'm going to jump forward one question, but know that I'm going to come back to the one about the biggest challenge. But we've got a question that's, what's the most important advice you have for nonprofits when looking for a corporate partnership? I know you've both just touched on it a little bit. Alignment definitely is key. Outside of that, is there other thoughts that you two have for nonprofits that might be looking for corporate partnerships?
Well, I'll throw out 3 things, and I'm doing a lot of work with some nonprofits right now, so this is very much on my mind. I think this goes back to being educated on the trends, like what's happening in the business community right now, and also if there's particular industries you're going to, understanding what's happening in their industry. I came from the energy industry, so at any given point in 10 years, there was some big issue we were dealing with. And so when I was approached by nonprofits that seemed rather clueless about oil prices dropping by 90% in a month, and we're not aware of that. That was not a very good, first impression. So, being aware of what's happening in the industries and the trends. And I think the second piece is being very strategic in what you pitch. So if you're doing that homework and you understand the alignment, then come with a proposal that is very clear of, here's what we would do with your money and the impact we would have. Here's how we could engage your employees. I know from some recent press releases that you are really pushing DE&I efforts internally. We think we could help you with that both internally and externally through XYZ if you're interested. Just really putting it out there of like, I've done the homework, we have really good opportunities, but we're also, if there's things we obviously don't know about your company, and if there's other ways we can help you, we would love to find more ways to partner that have positive impact on us both. Like, I think you have to approach it as a partnership, because that's where you're going to get the results. Like, companies are not ATMs, even when they're banks.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, that covers so much. I'm trying to think of anything that would add, because I think that strategic focus and just showing the research and coming up with those ideas of how to engage are really great. I think a lot of times when I first meet with a nonprofit and they kind of just go through, here's all their programs, and they don't mention anything about like, here's how I think this might tie in, or here's specific ways where I think you can engage. It's really easy to kind of be like, oh, well, thanks for the info. Like if I'm not really thinking through like this would fit here, this would fit here, and they haven't done any of that work, sometimes it's a little bit easier to kind of say like, this might not be the best partnership. I would say the other thing, and one thing, Dawn Rocky, who's on the call, I don't want to call her out, but she's with Boys and Girls Club. She's actually really great at this. I've always loved working with her when I was with Dish, because she's very good at picking out like, this is a really cool field day that we can put together for your company, or this specific thing is something that we can do. And I think she could probably teach us all a lot about that. I would say there was a question I saw in the chat too of nonprofits coming together with multiple, like a joint proposal, which I just love that idea. I think the collaboration piece there and just the idea of how you interact with other parts of the community too is really helpful to see. So when you're talking about like other corporate partners, that's really helpful for sure, of just like what examples of good partnerships look like for your organization, but also who do you partner with in the community that might overlap a little bit. So that is really helpful information of like, we had this program with the Denver Chamber, and you kind of have a light bulb go off of like, oh, we also partner with them. So this could be a really good collaborative approach. That's always really helpful information to have, that I think sometimes doesn't come out until you're deeper into the partnership, but is also really helpful up front.
Can I ask a quick follow-up before you move on from that topic? you guys talked about engaging your employees, and forgive my naivete, but I didn't realize that was an important component. Are you typically more often than not looking for not just obviously funding opportunities, but is your own employee engagement really that important? I hadn't heard that.
It depends. I think it depends on the program, but usually, yes, that is one of the ways that we sell the business impact is, hey, this is a great way to increase employee engagement overall at the company by having them engage with some community activities. So definitely, I would say 80% of the time, yes. There's very few, like sometimes if it's coming through like a donor advised fund or something, then we're obviously not looking for employee engagement on every single piece of every single nonprofit that we work with all the time. But for me, it's typically one of the top things that I look at.
I would agree. At QEP, that was a whole part of our strategy. We shifted away from lots of donations to various things to being really strategic and focused on really key areas, and that having an employee engagement to almost every single thing we did. And sometimes that was very in-depth, long-term volunteerism. Sometimes it was a short giving campaign. Sometimes it was a done-in-the-day event. But we tried to get away from any check writing relationships, and that everything really did offer an opportunity for our employees to know about the organization and have a way to touch it in some fashion. And I'd say that's definitely a trend. I think it's why, and Caity Dell could speak to this, that more and more CSR leaders are moving under HR, because so much of the focus is on the employee engagement pieces and that business case, they've just moved the group under there. So definitely things to think about.
Yeah, and I would say to that point too, and I forgot to mention this, when you're researching companies, one thing that's really helpful is look up where they're located. So you get a lot of really, like, you want a nonprofit that's kind of local, where you have a footprint, where you have employees, where you're going to be able to send them and engage them with the nonprofit. So sadly, like there's not a huge footprint for my company in Colorado anymore. So I don't get to work with a ton of Colorado nonprofits like I used to. But it's really helpful when people reach out and know, like, oh, the bulk of your offices are in San Jose or they're in Raleigh, Durham, and here's where our nonprofit touches down in unique ways in those areas.
I would add to that too, thinking about where CSR does sit in which department in the company will give you a lot of insight on what their kind of goals and objectives are with it. If it's under HR, we'll guarantee the employee piece is important. If it's under government affairs, that gives you a whole different lens to think about. If it's under marketing and communications, that can tell you a lot about where they're headed just based on where it sits.
You all are full of such great advice. I'm like taking notes furiously over here. This is amazing. Thank you both. I know we have another question on potential corporate sponsors. So kind of similar to what we've been talking about, but this one's more geared towards how do you find the right person in a company? Obviously, if there is a designated CSR person, that makes it a bit easier, but what would be your advice just in terms of finding the right person?
I would say if it's a sponsorship one, you can't find a CSR person, find a marketing person. That's probably the easiest.
I would agree. And I would say, like, most often it helps. I don't know that cold calls, like without any connection, knowing any actual person in a company, are very effective anymore because of that volume issue. So I would also say that if you have anyone in your organization who knows any employee in a company that's on your list, ask that employee to give you an idea of someone to start with. Because I would say from my personal experience, things that came from employees, there was an expectation of a very quick response. External things in the volume, it was like, do it when you can, but it wasn't the same level of response as employees.
And I would say, like, in that initial, if you find someone via LinkedIn or something, that was always my favorite when I was doing fundraising, and send a message, like say something specific about the company's program, kind of to what we were talking about before. I mean, I probably get at least 5 or 10 a week via LinkedIn. And so the messages are really easy to kind of get lost in an inbox. When I skim them and I see something of like, oh, they know like where a company footprint is, or they saw this program we did with scholarships for women in tech. Like, then it makes me want to reach back out and say like, oh, they clearly have something that's going to align with what we're working on. When it's just kind of a general, like, hey, I'd love to share some information with you. it's a get to it when I get to it.
Yeah, LinkedIn is fantastic and also simultaneously so hard when you start getting past a certain point of notifications and responses. This is fantastic. We have another question that's going back to a little bit more about your role. What is the biggest challenge that you are currently facing for each of you? I know there's probably multiple too, so feel free to do a few.
Well, my role is very different now, being a solo entrepreneur. And so for me, the biggest challenge is balancing time focused on my clients and then with time focused on the business and getting more clients. Like, I think that's probably every entrepreneur's struggle of figuring that out. And it's also just a different piece of managing every minute of my own time. Like when you don't have those 9 million internal meetings and demands put on you, all of a sudden you're like, oh, what should I be doing right now? So that's been a fun adjustment, but I think it's very similar to when I was in-house, though, the balance between the internal things and the external, moving forward versus just the basic administration types of things.
I would say my biggest challenge right now is probably honestly education and socialization internally. We've had kind of an internal employee engagement program just with like match giving and some volunteerism stuff, but don't have any really external investments that are really big. And so creating that strategy, socializing it, the same with sustainability, creating the business case, making the case for why we need to have that, especially investor relations helps a ton. We have our 2 biggest investors right now. They're asking a lot of questions. And as stressful as that is, it's also really helpful because that's a good motivator for everyone. And D&I, like all of those 3 things, I think the biggest challenge right now is just collecting, communicating, controlling the pace. I don't know if that is the right phrase. But a lot of leaders, once they kind of get excited about it, especially D&I right now, I think everyone wants to be here and most companies are pretty far back on that journey based on just a lot of conversations with some of my peers. And so a lot of it's kind of controlling the pace, making sure you're thoughtfully thinking of how to roll out programs, how to collect data, how to make the right next steps, how to make sure you're not overcommitting or overpromising where you can be by the end of the year. I think that's one of my biggest challenges, which lines up to my second challenge right now is making sure that no one on my team is burnt out. So that's a little bit of controlling the pace. It's just, it's a lot. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that, especially with remote work right now. And we get that question a lot internally of, hey, our team just needs a fun day. What can we do to benefit the community that's virtual? We just want to do something fun together. And I think there's been some cool nonprofits that have pivoted and done some really fun like comedy events that then benefit the nonprofit. Or just some fun interactions like wine tastings and things. So I think, I don't know if those are 2 very concise things, but I think the socialization and then controlling for burnout are my 2 biggest challenges right now.
I have one more, sorry.
Go for it.
I was thinking back to like when I was in-house, I think, and Katie's mentioned this a couple of times, that data collection and impact reporting was always challenging for us. And part of that, I think, was on my fault of not wanting to overburden our partners with more reporting, more data that they weren't already collecting, but then trying to work with what they had and then make it collective across our whole portfolio. I think the whole data piece is a challenge. I know for nonprofits, and definitely it was for us in-house too, of how do we show that impact, which of course is a big part of making the business case too.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Erica, I know you had another question specifically for Shanda. Do you want to ask that or do you want me to?
Well, I was going to say, I like Nicole's too. So maybe we could go to Nicole's and then I'll ask mine after that.
Perfect. All right, Nicole, you are up.
Hi, so I work at the Downtown Denver Partnership, and so I'm more where I help companies, right, with their engagement in a lot of our opportunities. But I'm really curious. So I don't know a lot about the internal workings of the getting employee engagement. So I'm kind of, are people really willing to volunteer to participate, or do you have to inspire them to participate? How do you go about doing that, just in one kind of bucket. And then with current times in these, with COVID, how has the employee volunteer engagement methodology either shifted, or how are you getting people engaged in opportunities in current times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think an ongoing challenge for all of us. The question that we get a lot, and I think a few of those nonprofits that I've mentioning pivot to some interactive things. I think at the beginning of this, I had pivoted a little bit towards working with partners that, you know, come and do a presentation, talk about the organization, share a little bit about what you do. We'll do like lunch and learn sessions. No one wants to do those anymore. Like everyone's on Zoom all day long. I think the feedback that I've gotten from most of our business is like, I love hearing about how people give back, but I'm on my screen all day long. Like our team just doesn't want to sit through another information session. So finding nonprofits that can pivot, like we've done a few, like I've said, like we've done some wine tasting. We had a nonprofit that hired like a comedian, or well, we hired the comedian, and then the nonprofit kind of just had some encouragement to donate to the nonprofit, share like a 5-10 minute snippet of what they do. And the rest of it was a lot more about engagement. And then we've done a lot of things of like, if teams have budget, shipping different packages out to them. So like shipping, we've done like prepaid shipping labels if they submitted their information about their local food bank, shipping that out, giving them a box. They put all their stuff into the box, and then we just have someone shipping all of that stuff back out to the food bank that's local for them if they weren't comfortable going to drop it off themselves. Because there's also a lot of sensitivity around, you know, we created a one-pager that was like, here's how you can seek out volunteer opportunities in your region. And we have a really cool partner in Benevity that they have a really great search tool for that, to be able to encourage people to find nonprofits in their area, and just had ideas of like, here's all the things you can do: virtual mentoring, virtual reading to kids programs, all of those things, and then some instructions on how they can log their hours so we can track for data. But I think we've pivoted a lot more on the employee engagement side from team volunteer events to really encouraging individuals to give back. And part of the way we've done that is just highlighting and inspiring, like an inspiring story. So we have like a volunteer highlight of the month that we highlight internally, and our senior leadership will kind of write different congratulations. We have a Slack channel, which I'm sure if other people have experienced Slack, it's like a love-hate relationship because it's just a constant messenger all the time. But what's really cool about it is it's an easy way for leaders. They don't have to send out a company-wide email. They can just post something in a Slack channel like, hey, we read this story. This is a really great way to give back. Like, good job, Michael. And then giving them kind of like able to post on our social channels to highlight like our volunteer of the month, or having leaders highlight it and kind of applaud what volunteers are doing on their own. So.
Well, at QEP, when we created the program, we tried to look at, kind of to your point, yes, some people will just volunteer because they will. Others need inspiration, coercion, incentives, you know, whatever. So we tried, yeah, voluntold, we call that. But we tried to look at how can we create a program over time that would have something for everyone if they so desired. And I'm not a fan of the voluntold. I was kind of kidding about that. But so we looked at ways to make it really easy, and not just volunteering, but also looking at employee giving. And so on the volunteering side, we did team events. So if people wanted to volunteer with their coworkers and kind of had that team building, but also people across different departments. So we would have group events that anyone could sign up for. So you could meet people in other areas. And then we'd have group events specific to teams that leaders wanted to get their team out volunteering together. We also have programs to promote individual volunteerism, like the Dollars for Doing, just pretty common. At Excel, we also had team grants, where if people recruited 6 or 7 other employees to go together, they could get a $500 donation for their favorite charity. So that really incentivized employees to create projects for their favorite charities and get some extra money for them. And then we had, and those are more kind of the done in the day, you know, light, kind of volunteer light, you know, go and get some stuff done. But we really, at QEP, what we tried to focus on more skills-based volunteering, and aligning that with our primary focus area, which was STEM education. So giving employees opportunities to engage in, you know, once a month with students coming into our office, and kind of that more long-term impact. And that was a subset of employees that were technical and STEM was their field and their passion. So that was one piece. And then we heard from other employees who were non-engineers that were passionate about education. So then we added a layer of that was elementary level. So we felt confident any of our employees could do 3rd and 5th grade science and not have to be a technical employee to bring that. So we just tried to evolve it so that there'd be something for if someone wanted to engage, that they could do it through our company, whether it was one of our focus areas or their personal passions. And I think that's pretty common, kind of as a field, like every company has their own, kind of strategy, but those are the things to look for. I think newer pieces in the shift to virtual and kind of what's happened with the pandemic is skills-based and pro bono volunteer opportunities are becoming bigger and more relevant because people can do that from anywhere, can also do it as virtual team projects. And it's like volunteer consulting, working with a partner who has a need, whether it's, marketing or HR, and pulling together a team of experts in your company to do a little mini consulting project for them. I think that's a growing area. And I will say, to put a little plug, Erica is helping to lead a group on the programs committee. There'll be a program about virtual engagement in May. Is that right, Jess? And some new trends with that. I think the other piece that people don't always think about as an employee engagement opportunity is looking at boards and committees. And can you, for that employee who will go out and do the planetary because it's fun, but they're really looking for something that builds a different skill set and can help advance them. And can their company help them find a board that's a good fit for them? I think that's another piece that we don't always think about as an employee engagement and leadership development. I think those are the main things I tend to go with my partners. I think the one more piece too is that on that, a lot of the motivation for companies is that workforce pipeline piece. And so I think historically we always thought like, oh, you do grants for, Girls Who Code and, women in engineering and those types of things, which are important. And then forgetting like, what else could our employees do? So one of my clients is, we have a great new partnership with a company that's helping to do like monthly seminars for the young men in the program on various sort of business acumen pieces. Like, so they're African-American college students, and historically the board and volunteers had to come up with all the education and kind of professional development for these students. Well, they're partnering with a really large company that has a huge HR team and talent development that now is creating custom trainings for these students because that company wants access to this young talent that's diverse, which is a priority for so many companies. And they're creating, like I said, custom sessions, but also engaging senior leaders of color and giving them the opportunity to have kind of virtual fireside chats where these young men can, email or, chat with the senior VP of a Fortune 500 company and ask like, I'm a sophomore in college, like, how do I get on the track to be you? And that people don't necessarily think of that as employee engagement, but it is. It's just different ways.
Yeah. And Shanda touched on this too, but I think for a lot of companies, we don't know if they're going to be going back to in-person, if they're going to stay remote. And that's going to be a question going forward of how to continue to engage over virtual. And I think one of I keep shipping Benevity because I've just had such a great experience with them. So if you are in CSR and looking for a volunteer platform, they're really great. And one of the things they're helping us right now, because I think one of the best ways for internal engagement is team competition. Like if you set up a leaderboard and say, hey, IT is way ahead of sales right now in terms of volunteer hours, like they just get very competitive, and it is one of the best ways to get engagement for across the board, like whether it's board engagement, volunteer hours, giving, whatever it is. But one thing that they're helping us with right now, because typically for Earth Month coming up, you would have like a lot of park cleanup days, you have a lot of communications about sustainability through the company. You can't do those external events right now. Like we're trying to be really sensitive to not encouraging employees to go out and meet with each other right now until everyone is vaccinated or we're back in the office. And so one of the things that we pivoted to is a feature that they call missions, but I think you could easily recreate it in a company or through a nonprofit idea. It's a list of different actions that people can take, and then they just check it off. And then it becomes like, oh, I completed this mission because I funded a carbon neutral nonprofit. I didn't eat meat for 2 days this week. I recycled. There's a list of different tasks you can take at home, and they're pretty easy to do, but it becomes a campaign that we're getting everyone involved with. And since it's obviously through our partner Benevity and they have access to our HR files, we can actually track like which teams are the most engaged, which teams have completed the most missions, and kind of pit people against each other with competition that way, in a fun way for some engagement that doesn't require everyone to be on a Zoom, but is still kind of an engagement throughout the company that people can participate in. So.
Well, I'll be curious to hear how the competition goes and which team wins. Erica, do you want to ask your question now?
Sure, I'm going to put Shanda on the spot. I think, you were describing about how you've had different roles in nonprofit and corporate, and then now as a solopreneur. And I guess, you made so many changes dramatic changes in your life, a little over a year ago. And just take us to that moment where you decided, to go out on your own as a consultant, because I think that's a really powerful and scary, risky kind of proposition. And, so just take us through that moment, if you would.
Sure, that's a great question, Erica. Well, part of it was the impetus was the big decision was to make the move to Hawaii. And that came about because of my significant other. He's got this amazing job opportunity. And I also had known I was leaving QEP by 2020. So it's kind of these things are happening at the same time. And that was because the company had been divesting of assets and shrinking. And like I said, I had grown this awesome program, and then I was exiting communities and redesigning it. And I knew by 2020, the company would either be bought and I would be sent on my way, or it would become a new small company and my work would be done. I would be like, okay, I've kind of ran the gamut here. I don't want to work for a 200-person company. So that was in our minds as then Brett got this opportunity. And it was like, why not? Like, who gets to move to Maui? And then it was like, what the hell am I going to do in Maui? Because I'm not a bartender and I have really no skill set in the tourism industry. And so when I started thinking, and we had time before I was moving and he was, and I started thinking about what I really love to do, and decided, you know what, I would love to consult. I would love to be able to work directly with nonprofits again, and work in CSR and help companies with their strategy and communications and execution on these programs, and kind of work in between those spaces. And can I take what I've learned in 25 years and working with both, and help people do it better? Like, really, that was kind of my goal. Like, how can I feel like I have learned so many things of like, I wish I had known when I was a development director. And again, now working directly with nonprofits has reminded me of like, sometimes in the companies, again, like so much is internal, like it's reminded me of when we're approaching like my friends, reminding me of like, they have so many other things going on. We have to make this easy for them to understand how they can have an impact through this nonprofit organization. So it was kind of just all those things came together, but also just like knowing what I love and knowing that I want to be able to help, that this would be the way to do it. So that's how I got here. And then it's very interesting because I moved in October of 19. And so I had a little bit of jump on the virtual everything because, you know, obviously in consulting, it's based on who you know and your reputation. So my clients are all on the mainland. And so I started that in October. And so when COVID hit, it was very odd because my day-to-day life did not change that much, which sounds weird to say, because I already was like working from home in a place where I knew no one. So we really didn't ever go out and do social things other than exploring the island. And so in some ways it's odd, but the virtual world and the shift of the pandemic has made it easier because now no one really cares that I'm in Hawaii, and like new clients, they're like, what time is it there? Okay, you know, we just work around it. And so I feel lucky to be able to do that. And I've been able to work on really interesting projects throughout the pandemic related to DE&I and public education and telemedicine, and just sort of, I happen to work with amazing clients doing really great work. So it's been good, really good. So thank you for asking.
Well, and we're so excited we did not lose you in the move to Hawaii. I will just say that on the CIVIC side. So we've got time for one last question, and it's a great one from Jennifer. She knows that kind of roles change with every single company, but she's one of the people coming from nonprofit and a small business, interested in corporate philanthropy, and curious what titles you two are seeing in the space that might be future job opportunities.
I think that's so funny. We talk about this all the time. I think there's like no set job titles anymore. I think you'll see CSR, you'll see social impact, you'll see sustainability.
Corporate citizenship. I would say a lot of like D&I's been tied to a lot of titles that I've seen lately. Or like if you're specifically looking at sustainability, sometimes it's a specific like sustainability analysis or something. Yeah, I don't feel like there's a lot of consensus on what everyone uses, which makes job hunting a little difficult, but
yeah. I will say it's kind of interesting. I don't think you see a lot of, corporate giving or corporate philanthropy specific anymore, or community relations as much. I think it's definitely like that trend it's under that bigger umbrella of CSR, social impact, ESG, etc.
Yeah, corporate citizenship, or that's always a good one too.
Well, thank you, Caity and Shanda, so much. I know I get the opportunity to connect with you both on a lot of the time. So it's so nice to hear your story even more in depth and be able to share both of your expertise with everyone else. To all our participants on the call, thank you so much for joining us today. It is so great to see that there's so much interest in this space, and having the opportunity to be able to provide you all with that space is really important to us at CIVIC. Just a quick reminder, I will be sharing once again this recording out and some resources that they mentioned or different ideas as well, just so you have it. Jennifer, to your question as well, we do try to share out CSR related jobs in our bi-weekly newsletter. So hopefully that might help a little bit, but exactly like they said, it kind of varies from company to company. We will have an event later this month on disaster response that'll also be included in there. And we do encourage you all to join that as we do gear up for the 2021 disaster cycle season here in Colorado. And we'll have plenty of other great events, like Shanda mentioned, on employee engagement and virtual life coming up, to partnerships and so many other great ones throughout the year. And our last and final announcement is that the 2021 CIVIC Summit, my favorite event of the year, has been, we're saving the date for October 27th, but more importantly with that, our RFP workshop request is now live, and it will be live through the end of this month. So if you are interested in hosting a 30 or 60-minute workshop, we would love to have you submit an RFP, and be sure to check out the follow-up email that I send out, hopefully later today, just depending on the time that Zoom takes to download. And once again, thank you all. You're fantastic, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.